Republic of Togo, Your Excellency, President of the Comoros, Azali Assoumani, honorable dignitaries, esteemed guests, fellow Africans, let me stand on existing protocols. Today we gather to discuss a critical aspect of our continent's development, the subject of unlocking our single market potential through legislative pathways that advance Africa's infrastructure development. My constituency is Boku Central. From my village, I can take a walk in the evening across Burkina Faso. The Republic of Togo is just an hour's motorcycle ride away from me. The women in my constituency regularly travel as far as Niger to trade. Many find their way to Kano in northern Nigeria and as far as Lagos. Before we conceived of a single economic community of West African states and an African continental free trade area, the women and men of my constituency treated these areas as a common market. They found ways of navigating around the strictures that our artificial boundaries had created. Let me confess that as a small boy growing up in the village, we used to carry timber on our heads across to the Burkina Faso, avoiding custom barriers for a small fee. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement gave hope to women in my village that by eliminating 95% of tariff lines on goods and services, they will be among the 30 million Africans to be lifted out of extreme poverty, and they will be among the nearly 68 million Africans whose income will be boosted. As a parliamentarian, I appreciate the impact of a share of $450 billion United States dollars increase of income to Africa through AfCFTA by 2035. Our exports could rise by $560 billion, mostly in manufacturing, and its job creation potential for the teeming youth. The agreement also expects to spare large wage gains for women, even more than men, and boost wages for both skilled and unskilled workers. But the challenge is how to have an infrastructure that will enable freer trade, more efficient movement of capital, goods and services across artificial colonial borders, more common currencies, mobile communication networks that don't terminate when they roam across borders, good roads and bridges, and above all, national security infrastructure that safeguard the security of themselves, their goods and services, and others, that guarantees their investments across borders. As a parliamentarian of close to 18 years, who also served in the ECOWAS sub-regional parliament for a while, I have first-hand experience of national and sub-regional legislative efforts to encourage infrastructure development, to enhance integration, and support trade. Let me say from the onset that whatever legal pathways we pursue, they must be ones that at the national levels promote favorable business environments, provide adequate incentive to investors in infrastructure, and streamline regulatory processes to make it easy to do business. We have to establish clear, consistent, and transparent laws governing infrastructure development, including procurement, licensing, and permitting. We must simplify and expedite approval processes for infrastructure projects, including eliminating bureaucratic hurdles and delays. We have to develop standardized contracts for infrastructure projects, ensuring fairness, transparency, and consistency. The legal pathways may offer tax breaks, exemptions, or holidays to attract investors in infrastructure development. Their investments must be guaranteed or insured to mitigate risks. The laws may provide subsidies or grants for infrastructure projects, especially those with high social impact. Our governments can't go it alone. Even when we have the funds to make the initial investment in the manufacturing plant, we don't often have the capacity to maintain the plants or maintain the roads in good condition or manage the investments to achieve the desired returns. We can benefit from pooling resources from the private sector, both at home and abroad. Private partnerships with the public to invest in infrastructure has become an attractive model. So legal pathways structuring public-private partnerships have become fashionable. They provide for the collaboration between public and private sectors and how to build in incentives needed by the private sector and the support that must come from government, and how disputes can be efficiently handled. Infrastructure financing that enhance infrastructure finance enhancing legal pathways are being pursued across the continent. Laws on infrastructure bonds have been passed. Our nations have experimented with green financing mechanisms and so many other tools. At the national level, we have established financing institutions dedicated to infrastructure development. Similarly, we have continental financing institutions like the African Development Bank that aim to finance such projects. We have the African Export-Export Bank. Some African development finance institutions are established as public-private partnerships with governments and private sector entities partnering to provide financing for development projects. Examples include the Africa Finance Corporation, AfC, and AfCFTA. Some African development finance institutions are established as sub-regional and national development banks with a mandate to provide financing for development projects within a specific country. Examples include the Development Bank of South Africa, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, East African Development Bank, West African Development Bank, Nigerian Development Bank, Development Bank of Ghana. We have so many of those banks. Excellencies, national development finance institutions in Africa can be categorized into several types based on their characteristics, functions, and focus. Generally, African development finance institutions' legal structures provide for their governance, membership, capital structure, lending operations, and risk management. These legal structures enable African DFIs to mobilize resources, provide financing for development projects, and promote economic growth and development in Africa. At the national level, we have developed a practice of legislating specific sectorial infrastructure funds, such as Ghana Education Trust Fund to fund school building and education infrastructure, the National Health Insurance Fund to fund projects in the health sector and insurance, Road Fund to fund road construction and maintenance, Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund to pool funds for infrastructure generally, the Minerals Development Fund, and the Minerals Income Investment Fund to fund projects in the mining sector. Several other such funds exist that are funded by taxpayers' contributions and levies. Corruption undermines Africa's infrastructure development by enabling diversion of funds, enabling inefficient project management, and unnecessarily increasing project costs. Corruption discourages investments and can skew project priorities. We must combat corruption. The model of designating and developing regional infrastructure corridors can be considered to promote trade and economic integration. For example, the West African Highway and the West African Power Pool. Let's consider establishing a continental infrastructure fund based on a levy similar to the ECOWAS levy. In my days at the ECOWAS Parliament, I advocated that we levied our telecommunication companies on all roaming calls within West Africa to fund the sub-regional security infrastructure to help countries like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, who were struggling with security issues and those in need of such support. I believe the geopolitics of West Africa would have been different today if we had taken those steps. To conclude, Your Excellencies, let me reiterate that we all know that Africa's growth and development are hindered by inadequate infrastructure, which limits our ability to trade, innovate, and compete globally. The African Continental Trade Agreement offers a unique opportunity to address these challenges and unlock our single market potential. However, to achieve this, we must prioritize legislative pathways that unlock financing for infrastructure development and efficient management of the infrastructure. These legislative pathways must develop a conducive business environment by streamlining regulations, reducing bureaucratic hurdles, and enhancing transparency. This will attract investment, stimulate innovation, and drive growth. Our legislation must help us combat corruption. To achieve these objectives, we must work together as a continent. We must share knowledge, expertise, best practices. We must also engage with international partners, organizations, and stakeholders to assess funding, technology, and capacity building. Your Excellencies, let me end here and say that unlocking our single market potential through legislative pathways that advance Africa's infrastructure development is a collective responsibility. We must work together to create a more integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. Thank you, Excellencies.
Please subscribe to Morris TVGA.